Hello, potential friends and adventurers. I'm Em, and today we are going to talk about where and how to start a role-playing campaign. This is for all of you who wanted to escape the old cliché of you all start in a tavern. Welcome to the DM table. Now, if you want something grand, it probably shouldn't be like everything else, and whilst the old tavern is good and quite pleasant, we've all had that campaign where we just chase some rats or werewolves down a sewer, we talk to the innkeeper, and eventually it's not much different than any other bare minimum ordinary D&D campaign. And to prevent that, or rather to just avoid doing it again and again, I'm a firm believer that no matter the narrative medium in question, there's two main approaches that you should observe, and then if you observe them, at least you observe them, and if you want to do something that's not one of these two, at least you're aware why, because at that point you're doing it for an important reason. It's not something you're doing accidentally and non-calculatedly. You might want to do it impulsively if you feel that it's right, but at least you'll know why afterwards. As for how to observe the two approaches, well, one way is to drop in the player, as in like with a parachute, or without, as some say, into something that is full of things to observe, full of excitement, full of unexpected things, full of new things, full of surprise, full of development right from the get-go. It's explosion of new reasons to immerse oneself, and the player barely knows where to look. And yet it all makes sense because you pre-prepared the interactions between these things. As for the other approach, it's quite the opposite. You lull the player into enjoying the surroundings, learning about the intricacies. It's like starting in a quiet village archetype. It's common, as well as the first one. The two are common in all narrative media, and they usually present one of the two extreme ends, but these are effective. Observe, for example, the beginning of famous series of games Kingdom Hearts. Just look up the intro and the beginning of the first game. For all other potential flaws, this is the most representative potentially way to visually see how the dunk them in approach works. Everything seems of high importance yet completely unknowable to the player to begin with, and then it's foreshadowing that it will make sense eventually, potentially. As for the other, well, I barely need to give an example, but any journey that begins with learning about the protagonist's town and customs and anything where you feel right at home and you want to be in the world because of its benefits, its warm atmosphere, its anything really. It can be done even a bit differently, like in Harry Potter at the beginning. It's not that pleasant for the protagonist, but then you learn about all the wizarding stuff that happens and you get immersed through the customs of that world. So, whilst the two are not really technically opposed to each other, their creative space in a way is. But the attributes of either are really good for a player wanting to get into the middle of a campaign right from the beginning. So you could go for one or the other, or you could try to reinforce attributes of both as hard as you can. I think it could be possible, and I have tried it several times, but I would like to hear about the results more. It's sort of like packing everything into one basket, so the result may vary if you're not used to using one and the other respectively individually first. That said, you might wonder how to pick one of the two, since you're probably picking one of the two or are trying for some sort of third approach or a hybrid because you want to improvise, but at that point you're probably somewhat experienced. So how to pick? Well, think about from preparation, from session 0, from your campaign pitch, from all those good things, what is it that you want to immerse the player the fastest into? Get into the flow and mind of the activity at hand, or multiple activities at that. Where do you want to start representing them and how? How do you want things to plug into things? Also, as always, think of good examples that you remember and see how things immersed you into flow of things. To remember those good examples, just think of the times where you started doing things and before you knew it, you were right at home. In a way like starting in Oblivion from the prison and the sewers and so on. It seems kind of very mundane, but there's lots of foreshadowing and important situations happening around you. Let me not spoil which ones, but once you're out there, one grassy island and ruin later, and you feel kind of right at home, even though you were just dunked into the plane. And, well, that's one way to do it. So think which activities will immerse your players into doing what they wanted to do and you heard them wanting to do and you also planned for them to do. Which things lead to those points of preparation that I mentioned earlier. Also, don't jump to wanting to just reverse engineer or deconstruct or counter cliches. Don't start in a tavern because you heard it's often used and then but a dragon breaks the wall and something. Until you have good hand in doing this, you needn't dabble too much in deconstruction. First, learn good construction. At least I think so. I really rarely want to deconstruct something just because I could. I'd rather immerse into a world that fits mine and my players' desires at the time. So, as such, if some deconstruction is necessary, I get into it, but otherwise I more keep to the grand and the glorious or the scenic or the atmospheric or whatever it is that I may need to have at the time. And the references, if there is room for them and they're not obtrusive, may come in later if we so desire. Once you have started the campaign, well, even before that, of course, you would want to potentially have a mechanical way of, well, I referred to it as a vehicle in an earlier video, mechanical method or a vehicle of getting quickly from part of the story to part of the story, because your beginning shouldn't be too far away from where you want to go further in the campaign. It shouldn't be too hard to interact with. I have happened to do this myself. Place the players in some faraway valley, and then it's kind of harder to get into the juicy meat of things right from the get-go after they have had enough of the valley. So even if you want a deserted valley, you should think how can it connect quickly afterwards once it's time to do so. How do you get quick transportation to the next chapter of story and excitement? How do things plug into it? Once you know this, you probably want to think of at least one more way just in case. Then you're probably good. You can think of this on the fly. It's not necessarily a thing that you need to hugely pre-prepare, but I suggest pre-preparing it a little just so that you're sure that you can, well, escape the valley if need be. After all this, think how do things affect atmosphere of the campaign. You had a story start. How does it play into the rest of the perceived campaign that potentially will be happening? Does it foreshadow the goals? Does it play into grand arcs? Does it catch attention? Does it paint a picture? All this should be taken into account so that you have a grasp on the world and that your players get it as well as soon as they get through this piece, or at least this and a couple of other pieces. At that point, you're good. So feel free to, in fact, I would love to hear from you in the comments if you have any questions. This would be my privilege of talking to you, answering your questions, and we can share details on how it all went. And as usual, I wish you luck in your adventuring. So, adventure, if you thought this was unique, maybe you can spare a click. And I hope to see you next week. Bye.